hands with. I tell you that not to make you sad, but so you understand what kind of man I was when this happened. A man who had already decided the world takes more than it gives, and the smart thing is to want nothing. I was wrong about that. It took a half-mad hound and a hill that shouldn't have been there to show me how wrong. If you've ever stood at the mouth of something dark and felt it breathing back at you, if you've ever had to choose between your own safe life and a stranger's whole one, then sit close to the fire. This part of the story is short on comfort and long on cold. But stay with me, because the thing I found inside that hill is still alive today, and so am I, and there were 3 nights that winter when neither of those should have been true. Let me start where it started, with the dog. Hap wouldn't quit barking. That was the first wrong thing. Hap was not a barking dog. I'd raised him from a pup that fit in my coat pocket, and in 8 years I'd heard him sound off maybe a dozen times, at a cougar once, at a drunk surveyor twice, and at the dark in general on the night my brother died, like he knew before I did. Hap was a watcher, a leaner, a dog who said what he had to say with the set of his ears and the weight of his head on your knee. So when he stood at the edge of the timber that gray afternoon and bayed like the devil himself had moved into the next valley, I came up off the stump with my knife half out and my coffee spilling into the snow. "What?" I said, not a question the way I said it, more a complaint. He looked back at me, then north, then back at me, and he did the thing that, looking at it now, I think was the dog asking me to be a better man than I'd been planning to be that day. He took 3 steps toward the ridge, stopped and waited, like a man holding a door. I want to tell you about where I lived, so you can feel the size of the thing he was asking. My cabin sat in a fold of the high country that didn't have a name on any map, because the men who made maps had never gotten that high or stayed that long. I'd built it myself the autumn after I quit caring whether I lived in a town. Trapping kept me in coffee and lead. The rest I did without. I was 41 years old that winter, and I had spoken aloud to exactly 4 living things since the first snow. Hap, my mule, a Mormon peddler who got lost on the wrong trail, and God once, when I dropped a deadfall log on my own foot and had some words for him about it. So you understand, I was not a man who went looking. Looking is for people who still believe there's something out there worth the walk. I'd traded that belief for quiet a long time back, and I'd thought it a fair deal. The ridge Hap wanted was a 2-hour climb in good weather. It was not good weather. The sky had that flat dead light that means snow's coming and means it soon, and the smart thing, the only thing a sane mountain man does, is bank the fire, check the smoke, and stay put. I knew all this. I knew it the way you know your own name. I went anyway. I'd like to say it was courage. It wasn't. It was that Hap had never once asked me for anything, and I am the kind of fool who can refuse a man and refuse God but cannot refuse a good dog. The climb took longer than 2 hours. The snow started before we cleared the timber, fat lazy flakes at first, the kind that look gentle and aren't, and Hap kept 20 feet ahead the whole way, glancing back to be sure I followed, never once slowing to let me catch breath. My lungs burned. My bad foot, the one the deadfall got, ached down deep where the cold lives. I cursed him in a low, steady mutter the entire climb, which is a thing I do, talk to keep my legs moving, and somewhere up there I switched from cursing the dog to telling him about my brother, which I had not done out loud to anyone ever. He'd have gone too, I told Hap's swinging tail. Caleb, he never could leave a hurt thing be, cost him in the end. The dog didn't answer. Dogs are good that way. We came over the ridge into a country I had never seen, and I'd lived 11 winters within a day's walk of it. That stopped me cold, colder than the wind. A man learns his ground. I knew every draw and dry creek and rock pile for miles, knew them in the dark, knew them the way your tongue knows your teeth. And here was a whole little valley I had never once laid eyes on, tucked behind the ridge like a coin behind a man's ear. In the middle of it stood the hill. I want to be careful describing the hill because I've had years to think about it and I still can't make it sound right. It was too round. That's the plainest way I can put it. The country up there is all broken angles, shale and slide in the bones of old mountains, and a thing that's round in that landscape is a thing that hands made, or time made on purpose. It rose maybe 60 feet, smooth-shouldered, dusted white, and it sat in that hidden valley with the patience of something that had been waiting a great while and was prepared to wait longer. Hap was already at the base of it, digging. Not playing digging. Digging like he meant to reach China by suppertime. Snow and frozen dirt flying back between his legs, and that sound coming out of him low and steady, not a bark anymore but a kind of moan, a sound I'd only heard him make once, the night beside my brother. Hap, my voice came out strange in all that white silence. Hap, leave off. He didn't. He scrabbled at the base of the hill where the snow had drifted against it, and I came down the slope half sliding, meaning to drag him off by the scruff, and that's when I saw what he was digging at. It was a door. Now I've found things in the high country, old fire rings, a rusted Spanish stirrup once in a creek bed, 100 years old if it was a day, the high bones of men who'd guessed wrong about a winter. The country keeps things, but I had never found a door, and this was a door, or the edge of one anyhow. Where the drift had blown clear I could see a slab, dark wood gone gray and hard as iron, set flush into the side of that round hill, and fitted so close I'd have walked past it 100 times and called it shadow. Hap had cleared a gap along the bottom edge, no wider than my hand, and now he had his nose jammed in it, breathing, and his whole body had gone still and trembling at once. I knelt. The cold from the ground came up through my knees like a knife, and I put my own face down to that gap, the way you do at a keyhole, feeling like a fool and a thief and a child all at once. Warm air came out of the hill. I don't expect you to feel that the way I felt it kneeling there. But understand, it was 8 degrees and falling, the snow coming on serious now, the light going to nothing. And out of that gap at the bottom of a door in a hill came a breath of warm air, smelling of wood smoke and tallow and something else, something animal and human and alive, the smell of a place where things were being kept warm on purpose. Somebody lived in the hill. I came up off my knees so fast I near fell over backward. Every story I'd ever been told around a fire came up my spine at once. The old trapper's tales, the things that lived high up and weren't men, the reasons the people themselves wouldn't camp certain places. I am not an educated man, and I am not a brave one, whatever Hap seemed to think, and for a long moment I stood in the failing light with my heart going like a trapped bird and my hand on my knife, ready to run all the way home and never speak of it. And then I heard the child cough. It came from inside. Through the door, muffled, small, the wet rattling cough of a young one with sickness in its chest. I have no children. I have, God help me, never wanted any. But there is a sound a sick child makes that goes underneath everything a man has built up around himself, underneath all the quiet he's bought and paid for, and gets at the soft, cowardly, hopeful animal still living down there. I know this because I heard it that day and felt it happen to me, and I have not been the same man since. The cough came again, then a voice low, a woman's hushing, not words I knew. The cadence of the Apache tongue which I had heard before, traded against before, and feared before, in the days when there was reason to fear it and to be feared in return. I stood very still. Here is the thing you have to understand about that winter if you weren't there. The army had been in the mountains all autumn. There'd been a column through the low country in October, and word, the kind of word that travels even to a man who talks to nobody, was that they'd scattered a band that had jumped the agency, run them up into the high country to freeze or starve, and meant to bring back any they found. There was money in it. There was, for some men, a kind of joy in it that I won't describe. The people who'd run had run because the alternative was a slow death in a place that wasn't theirs, and the men chasing them called that a crime. I knew all this the way you know weather, and I knew that the smart thing, the safe thing, The thing that kept a man's cabin off the army's mind and his name out of their ledger was to back away from that door, climb my ridge, go home, bank my fire, and forget the round hill existed. Nobody would ever know I'd stood here. The snow would cover my tracks before full dark. I could keep my quiet and my coffee and my one good dog and the careful nothing I'd built my life out of. I had my hand on Hap's collar to pull him back. And the door opened. I have tried many times to describe her face in that first instant, and I always come up short, so I'll just tell you what I saw. She was young, younger than I'd guessed from the voice, maybe 20, with a child of perhaps 4 on her hip and a knife in her free hand held low and ready, the blade pointed at my belly, her arm not shaking even a little. Behind her, in the dark of the hill, I could feel rather than see other shapes. Her face was thin with hunger and hard with the particular kind of courage you only get when you have decided you will die before you let something happen to what's behind you. Her eyes found mine and held them, and what was in them was not fear. It was arithmetic. She was figuring how fast she could open me up and whether it would be fast enough. We stood like that, snow coming down between us. Hap, the great trader, wagged his tail. The child on her hip looked at the dog and made a small sound, not a cry, a kind of wondering hum, and reached one thin hand toward Hap, and the woman's eyes flicked down to her child and back to me, and in that flick I saw the whole shape of her impossible situation. She could not run. The child was sick and there were others, old ones I'd later learn, and the snow had closed the country. She could not fight me and the cold and the army all at once and win. And she could not trust me, because in her short, hard life no man who looked like me had ever once given her reason to. I did the only thing I could think to do, which was the thing a fool does. I let go of Hap's collar very slowly, and I held both my empty hands up where she could see them, and I crouched down low to make myself small, the way you do with a spooked horse, and I said the only Apache word I was sure of, which a Jicarilla man had taught me 20 years before over a trade of tobacco, the word for peace, or near enough to it, mangled surely in my mountain man mouth. It was not a good word. My pronunciation must have been an insult, but she heard a white man on his knees in the snow trying to speak her language with his hands held open, and something in her face not softening, I won't lie and say softening, but recalculating, something shifted. She did not lower the knife, but she did not use it. And the child, having no sense of any of this, leaned out and touched Hap on the nose, and Hap licked the small hand once gravely, the way he did everything, and the child laughed. It was the only sound any of us made for a long while. A sick child laughing in the snow at the door of a hill, while 2 strangers who had every reason to kill each other knelt 3 feet apart and did not. Her name, I would learn, was Dasha, though I am surely spelling it wrong, and she would not tell it to me for 2 more days. The child was her sister's son. The sister was dead on the October trail. Inside the hill were 2 others, an old woman with a wound in her leg gone bad, and a boy of maybe 11 with frostbite turning his toes black. They had found the hill the way I had by accident in flight, and they had not built it. It was older than any of them, older than memory, a chambered earthwork some long-gone people had raised for reasons nobody now alive could tell you, with a spring inside it that didn't freeze and a smoke hole the snow couldn't find. It had saved their lives for 11 days. It would not save them for many more, because the old woman was dying and the food was gone and the boy could not walk, and Dasha had stood watch at that door with her knife every hour she wasn't holding the child, waiting for the army or the cold, whichever came first. I didn't learn all that the first day. The first day I learned only this, that I had a choice, and that the easy half of it was already dead in me, killed by a child's laugh and a dog's wet nose, and that I was going to do the hard, stupid, dangerous thing whether my better judgment liked it or not. I straightened up slow. I pointed at myself, then at the ridge, then made the motion of carrying, of bringing. Food, I meant, medicine, I have it. I'll bring it. She watched me make my clumsy signs, and I watched her decide whether I was a liar. It is a terrible thing, to be measured by someone who has every right to expect the worst of you and has rarely been disappointed. I held still and let her measure. Then she said something to the child and stepped back into the dark of the hill and pulled the door most of the way shut, but not all the way. Left it open the width of a hand, which I understood even then was the largest act of trust she had it in her to make, and likely more than I'd earned. I climbed home through the dark and the deepening snow with Hap a gray ghost at my heel, and I did not feel the cold at all, and I did not feel the quiet I'd loved so long, and I understood that whatever I'd traded my heart away for all those years ago, the dog had just bought it back for me at the price of my safety, and I was not sure I was grateful and I was not sure I wasn't. I'll tell you the part I'm least proud of. Halfway down the ridge I stopped. Hap stopped with me. The snow was filling my tracks already, just like I'd known it would, and the thought came to me, clear and cold and reasonable as anything, that I could still not do this. That I could go home, and in the morning the storm would have buried the valley and the hill and the door, and if the people in it died, well, they were already dying when I found them, and I hadn't made the world that was killing them, and a man can't save everyone, and the smart thing, the safe thing. Hap was looking at me again, same as at the timber's edge, holding the door. I know, I told him, my voice cracked on it. I know what he'd say it too. Caleb, my brother, who never could leave a hurt thing be, and it cost him, and I had spent the years since telling myself that proved him a fool and me, the wise one for keeping my hands in my pockets and my heart shut up tight. Standing on that ridge in the dark, I understood for the first time that I hadn't kept my heart safe. I just kept it empty. And there is no safety in an empty thing, only the absence of a reason to be afraid, which a coward will mistake for peace right up until a dog drags him to a hill and shows him the difference. I went home. I loaded the mule before I let myself sleep, every scrap of food I had, the laudanum I kept for my foot, clean cloth, the good knife, a kettle, blankets I'd want for myself before that winter was through. I worked by firelight with my hands shaking and not from the cold. And that's where I'll leave it for now, with the mule loaded and the storm at the window and a man who'd spent 11 years learning to want nothing lying awake all night wanting, with his whole foolish reopened heart, for 5 strangers in a hill to still be breathing when he climbed back over that ridge at first light. They were, but by the time I reached them the next morning, there were horses in the valley that weren't mine. There were 4 of them, and 1 mule of mine, and a hill full of people who would hang or freeze depending on which way the next 10 minutes went. I counted the soldiers before I counted my own chances, which tells you something about how a man's mind sorts things when it's frightened. 4 horses, blowing steam, fetlock deep in snow that had stopped falling sometime in the night and left the valley white and soft and terribly, terribly bright. 4 men in blue with the collars up and the misery of a cold night's ride sitting on their faces like a second uniform. And there, ground-tied near the base of the round hill, my mule, the one I'd loaded in the dark with my shaking hands, placidly nosing at the snow for grass that wasn't there. I'd come over the ridge into the middle of it. There was no backing up. A man's tracks in fresh snow are a confession written large, and besides, Hap had already gone bounding down the slope toward the horses with his whole rear end wagging, the great idiot, because to Hap a horse was a friend, and a soldier was a man, and men were, in his experience, a source of dropped food and ear scratchings. So I did the only thing left to a man caught flat. I made myself into exactly what they expected to see. "Well, I'll be goddamned," I called out, loud and easy, ambling down the slope with my hands swinging loose and my heart trying to climb out my throat. "Company, up here, in this." The one in front turned in his saddle. A sergeant, I could read that much off him, the way he sat, the way the other 3 angled themselves toward him without being told. Older than me, maybe, hard to say under the beard and the windburn. He had a face like a fist that had been hitting things for a long time and expected to hit a few more before it was done. "This your mule," he said. Not a question, the way he said it. I knew that trick. I used it myself on the dog. "It is," I said. "Wandered off in the night, damnedest thing. I've been tracking the fool animal since first light." I clapped my hands together against the cold and grinned at them, and it is a strange thing to grin while your whole insides have turned to creek water, but I have a face that grins easy and means nothing by it, and I have never in my life been gladder of that than I was right then. "You boys didn't have to round him up for me, but I'm obliged. Saves my legs." A lie has to have a true thing standing close to it or nobody believes it. The mule had wandered, I'd ground-tied him sloppy in the dark, and the laudanum fumbling and the fear, and he drifted, and the soldiers had followed the only fresh tracks in a dead white country straight to the hill. The true thing was that I was a man who'd lost his mule. I leaned on that true thing with all my weight. The sergeant looked at me, then at the mule. Then, and my creek water insides went to ice at the side of the hill at the dark slab of door, mostly snowed over now, but there. A man who'd spent years reading ground the way I read it would see what I'd seen, that the snow lay wrong against that hill, that something was different there. "You live up here," he said. 11 winters. I scratched Hap behind the ears, casual, putting my body between the sergeant's line of sight and that door without making it look like that's what I was doing. "Trap mostly. You're a long way up for cavalry. You lost." One of the younger ones snorted, a private, frost in his thin mustache, the kind of boy who should have been behind a plow in some green country, and instead was freezing on a mountain hunting people. The sergeant didn't look at him. The sergeant kept looking at me, and I understood that this man was not a fool, and that the next thing I said would matter more than anything I'd said in 11 years of saying almost nothing. "We're hunting Apache," the sergeant said. "Band jumped the agency in the fall. We run most of 'em down. Reckon there's stragglers up here yet. You see any sign?" Here is the moment. I want to set it down honest. I'm not a good liar in the way of men who enjoy it. I lie the way I do most things, clumsy, reluctant, and only when cornered. And I had a half-second, looking at that sergeant's fist of a face, where the safe road opened up clear and wide in front of me one last time. All I had to do was point. Just point at the hill and say there's somebody in that mound, came up on it yesterday, sounded like a woman and a young one. And these 4 would do the rest, and I'd ride my mule home, and I'd never have to know exactly what the rest was, and nobody, not one living soul, would ever blame me. I'd have done my duty as a white man in that country was reckoned to have a duty. I'd be the wise one, the smart one, the one who kept his hands in his pockets. I thought about the child's laugh, the wondering hum it made, reaching for the dog. I thought about Caleb, who never could leave a hurt thing be. And I heard myself say in the same easy grinning drawl I'd been using the whole time, "Saw tracks 2 days back down the east draw, 3, 4 of 'em moving fast heading down toward the flats. Figured they were making for the river before it froze hard." I shook my head, sorrowful, a man sharing useful news. "If it was your stragglers, they're long gone off this mountain. Wouldn't nobody stay up high in this, not with the spring water froze and no game. They'd die." The east draw runs away from the round hill, down and out toward open country, toward the very flats the army had already swept. I was sending them back the way they'd come, downhill, into easy riding and a warm camp, and a story they could tell that wrapped the hunt up tidy. I was offering them a reason to quit. The sergeant chewed on it. The horses stamped. Somewhere a long way off a tree cracked in the cold like a gunshot, and every one of us flinched, and I laughed at us all flinching, a real laugh that time, because fear has to go somewhere and out the mouth is better than out the bowels. "Spring waters froze, you say?" the sergeant said. "Everything's froze," I said. "I've been busting ice for my own self twice a day. Up here a man'd kill for running water this time of year." I let that sit. Then, because a good lie is generous, I gave him a gift. You boys come down to my cabin, warm up, I'll boil coffee. Half-day's ride down. Got a fire and a roof, which is more than this country's offering otherwise." I offered them my home, my fire, the thing I'd guarded 11 years from every living man. I offered it freely and prayed to a God I'd had words with that they would say no, because if 4 soldiers rode to my cabin and I had to keep up the grinning fool for half a day, I did not think I had it in me, and somewhere in the small dark hours I'd have said the wrong thing and undone us all. Hap saved it. I'll go to my grave believing it. While the sergeant chewed on whether to trust me, my dog, who had been working the line of horses for dropped food and finding none, wandered over to the base of the hill, to the door, to the hand-wide gap I'd left that she'd left the night before, and he put his nose to it, and his tail came up slow, and he made that low moan I'd heard twice now and would hear in my dreams the rest of my life. The sergeant saw it. I saw him see it. His eyes went from the dog to the hill to me, and the easy false world I'd built up out of grins and the east draw started to come apart at the seams, and I knew that in the next breath he was going to step down off that horse and walk over and put his hand on that door. So I did the second worst thing I did that winter, and I am not proud of it, and I'd do it again. Hap, I roared it, furious. And I crossed the snow in 4 strides and I grabbed my dog, my good dog, my best friend, the soul that had dragged me back from the dead, and I cuffed him hard across the muzzle, harder than I'd ever struck him, hard enough that he yelped and shrank down and looked at me with a hurt I have not forgiven myself for to this day. Get off it. Damn fool dog's been hunting marmot in every rockpool from here to the river, I said to the sergeant, loud, dragging Hap back by the scruff, putting myself once more between blue eyes and that door. Be at it all winter if I let him. There's a den under half these hills. You ever smell a marmot den? Like a privy and a wet dog had a baby. The young private laughed. The frost-mustached one. He laughed and it broke something, the tightness in the moment, the held breath, and one by one the others let go of it too, even the sergeant, a grim small twitch at the corner of his fist of a mouth. And the sergeant said marmot, like the word tasted of giving up. Hell, boys, we're chasing a man's hungry dog up a mountain in January. He gathered his reins. Mister, we'll pass on the coffee. Daylight's short and the captain wants us off this rock before the next blow. You see Apache, you ride to the fort, there's money for it. I'll surely do that, I lied to the man's face, with my hand still gripping the scruff of the dog I'd just struck, and the people I was lying for not 10 feet away through a slab of ancient wood, listening to every word in a tongue most of them couldn't follow, knowing only by the rise and fall of the voices whether they would live to see noon. The soldiers turned their horses downhill, toward the east draw, toward the lie I'd fed them. The frost-mustached private gave Hap one last look, a kindly one, a boy who liked dogs, and then they were gone over the white shoulder of the land, 4 blue shapes shrinking into the bright, and the only sound left in the world was my own breathing and my dog not coming to me when I called. Hap stood 6 feet off, head low, watching me, wouldn't come. Hap, my voice had gone to nothing. Hap, I had to, you understand, you'd have given us up, you don't know. He didn't come. A dog can't be reasoned with about a betrayal. He only knows the hand that has always been gentle struck him, and the world he understood got smaller by that much. I had spent his whole life teaching him that I was safe. And in one cuff I'd taught him I wasn't, and that is a lesson that does not come out of a creature easy. I knelt in the snow and held out my open hand the same way I'd held it out to Dasha, the same surrender, and I waited, and the cold came up through my knees, and after a long time, a longer time than I want to write down, he came. Stiff. Wary. He pressed his head against my chest, not because he'd forgiven me but because he had no one else same as me, and we knelt there in the trampled snow, the man and the dog, both of us shaking, while behind us the door of the hill swung slowly open. Dasha stood in it. The knife was gone from her hand. The child slept against her shoulder, and she had heard, somehow understood, the shape of what had just happened in the valley, that the blue men had come and gone, and that the white man on his knees had sent them away and struck his own dog to do it. She looked at me with that arithmetic face of hers, and I watched her finish a sum she'd been working since the door first opened, and come out the far side of it somewhere new. She said a word, Not the mangled peace word I'd offered. A different one, soft, and she touched her own chest when she said it, and I understood the way you understand things across the gap between two tongues, by the weight a person puts on them, that she was telling me her name, trusting me with it. Dasha. I said it back, surely butchering it, and the corner of her mouth did the same small twitch the sergeant's had done, but warmer, much warmer, and she stepped back and pulled the door wide, all the way wide, and held it open. For me. I will not pretend I knew what I was walking into. I'd smelled the inside of that hill through a gap. I had not seen it. And the truth of it, when I ducked through the low door with the mule's load of food and medicine and blankets in my arms and Hap a careful step behind, the truth of it stopped me the way the round hill itself had stopped me on the ridge. It was built. I'd half told myself the night before that it was a cave, a lucky hollow, and it was not. Hands had raised it, long dead hands, hands whose people had no name I'd ever heard, chambered and shored and shaped. A curving passage that opened into a round room with a low stone hearth at the center and a smoke hole above it that let out a thread of gray into the white sky. And along the wall a seep of dark water that moved, unfrozen, in a country where everything else had gone to iron. A spring inside a hill. Warm air off the water and off the small fire. It had been keeping people alive, I would later come to believe, for longer than my own kind had been on the continent, and it had been forgotten by everyone but the desperate, who find such places the way water finds the low ground, by falling, by running out of any other way to go. And in that warm round room were the others Dasha had been guarding with her knife and her life. The boy of 11, his blackening feet wrapped in what rags they'd had, watching me come in with eyes that had already seen too much to widen at one more strange thing. And the old woman. The old woman was the one I'd come for, in the way you come for the worst thing. Her leg, under the blanket, gave off the sweet rotten smell I'd been dreading since the night before, the smell that, in my brother's case, had meant there was no more time, and that the only mercy left was the kind no man wants to be the one to give. She lay by the fire, small and dry as a fallen leaf, and her eyes when they found me were clear, far clearer than they had any right to be, and she looked at me a long while. Then she laughed. A thin, cracked, astonished laugh, and she said something to Dasha, who did not translate it but who looked away and pressed her lips together, and the boy looked away too. And I understood that the old woman had said something true and hard and probably funny in the bottomless way that only the dying can find things funny. Something about the white man with his arms full of blankets walking into the hill to save people his own people were trying to kill. And I have wondered every year since exactly what it was, and I am almost glad I never learned, because some things are better as a laugh you didn't quite hear. I set down the load. I knelt by the old woman's leg, and I unwrapped it, and Dasha knelt across from me, and over that ruined leg in the warm dark of a hill older than any of our people's, two strangers who'd been measuring each other for the knife the day before bent their heads together and tried to figure out how to save the unsavable. I had the laudanum. I had clean cloth. I had a knife I kept sharp enough to shave with. I had, God help me, done this before once on my own brother and failed, and I had sworn I would never do it again, and here I was breaking that swear by firelight for a woman whose name I didn't know in a hill that shouldn't exist. I looked up at Dasha. I held up the knife so she could see it, and I held up the laudanum, and I made the sign, the cutting sign, the it has to come off or she dies, and it may kill her either way sign, and I watched her understand it, and I watched her carry the question to the old woman in their own soft tongue, and I watched the old woman answer. The old woman reached out one dry hand and put it flat against my chest, over the heart the dog had bought back for me, and she pushed, gently, a push that meant go on, a push that meant I am not afraid and you must not be either, a push that meant something I have spent the rest of my life trying to deserve. And then, because the world that winter could not let a single hard thing happen at a time, that was the moment Hap's head came up, and his ears, and that low moan started in his chest again, and through the open door, faint, far off, but coming back came the sound I had bought us free of an hour before. You learn what you're made of in the gap between one breath and the next. Mine went like this. The horses were coming. The old woman's hand was on my chest, pushing me toward a thing that had to be done now or never. The knife was in my hand, and I had, by my reckoning, a quarter-hour at most before blue riders crested the white shoulder of the valley and found a snowed-over door that a dog kept nosing at, and a set of fresh tracks that no story about a lost mule could explain twice. I could not do both. I could not take a woman's leg and save us all from the riders. A man only has the two hands. So I made the choice that's haunted me longest of all the choices that winter, and it was this. I gave the knife to Dasha. I put the haft in her palm and folded her fingers over it, and I held up the cloth and the laudanum and made her watch me. Here, you soak this. You wait till the eyes go soft. Then here, fast all the way, and you don't stop no matter what sound she makes. You don't stop. I made the cutting motion slow and then fast. I pointed at the boy, at his strong young arms. He holds her down. I pointed at myself, then at the door. Then I made the grinning fool's face I'd worn for the sergeant. And I think Dasha, God love her, near laughed even then because she understood. I was going back out to lie to the army again while she cut her own grandmother's leg off by firelight in a hill. We were each going to do the unbearable thing alone. That's what sacrifice mostly is, I've come to think. Not the grand gesture. Just two frightened people in a dark room agreeing to carry the half of it that's theirs. She looked at the knife. She looked at the old woman. She looked at me, and she nodded once, hard, and I have never in my life been trusted with anything so heavy as that nod gave back to me. I took Hap and I went out into the snow. The riders were closer than I'd feared. Not over the shoulder yet, but I could hear them in the still cold, the creak of leather, a man's cough, the particular wet crump of hooves in deep snow, and they were coming up the same trail the first four had used, the trail my own tracks had cut, and there was no story left in the world that would uncut them. So I stopped trying to hide. I did the opposite. I walked Hap out into the open middle of the valley, well away from the hill, kicking up snow, being loud, being seen, and when the first horse came over the rise, I was standing there in the white with my arms up and my fool grin on, a man who wanted very badly to be noticed, so that nobody would think to look at a quiet mound off to the side. It was the frost-mustached private, out front, alone, almost the sergeant a length back, and behind them not the four from before but 7, 8, a whole squad strung out down the trail, and at the head of it on a tall gray horse a man I knew at a glance was the captain the sergeant had spoken of, the way you know a wolf from a dog, a young man. Clean-shaven where the others were bearded. The kind of clean a man stays only if he's never had to do the dirty part himself, and means to keep it that way by making others do it. "You again," the sergeant said, and there was something in it almost like apology. "Me again," I agreed. The captain rode up. He had eyes like two cold coins. He looked at me, and at my dog, and at the valley, and at the round hill, and he held on the round hill a half-beat too long, the way the sergeant had, and my Creekwater guts told me this one would not be turned by a story about the East Draw. "My sergeant says you sent his patrol downhill this morning," the captain said. "Pleasant. That was the worst of it, how pleasant. On a report of tracks heading for the river." "That's so." There were no tracks. He let it sit in the cold. "We rode the East Draw down and back. Nothing. Clean snow." He smiled, and it did not touch the coins of his eyes. "Now, a man's mule wanders that I credit, but a man who sends armed soldiers off in the wrong direction in a country where we are hunting hostiles, that man, I find, usually has a reason." Behind me, through the snow and the door and a hill's worth of ancient earth, I heard, or I have always told myself I heard, and who's to say I didn't, a single short scream. Cut off fast. The old woman, the knife, Dasha doing her unbearable half while I did mine. I coughed loud to cover it, and stepped a pace closer to the captain, drawing his coin-eyes off the hill and onto me. "My reason," I said, "is I'm an old fool who sent you the wrong way 'cause I can't tell my draws apart no more. 11 winters up here have froze something in my head." I tapped my temple, grinning, playing the simple mountain hermit, the harmless lunatic, and I leaned into it with everything I had because it was the last card in my hand. East, west, all white to me now. You want, I'll come down to the fort and they can lock me up for wasting the army's mourning. I'd take a warm cell about now, tell you true. It might have worked. The sergeant wanted it to work. I could see it on his fist of a face. A man tired to his bones who'd like nothing better than to write no hostiles, one crazy trapper in the day's report and ride down to a fire. But the captain with the clean jaw and the cold coins, the captain wanted a thing the sergeant had stopped wanting a long time ago. He wanted to be right. And men who need to be right are the most dangerous creatures God ever made, more dangerous than any band that ever jumped an agency. Because a band runs to live, and a man who needs to be right will burn the whole valley to prove he smelled smoke. "Search the mound," the captain said. And here is where the story turns, and I want to set it down exactly, because for a long time afterward I got it wrong in my own head, made myself the hero of it, and the truth is humbler and harder than that. I did not save them. Hap did, again, for the last time. When the two privates dismounted and started for the hill, my dog, who had not forgiven me, who had walked stiff and wary at my heel all morning, who had every reason in the world to be done with my whole faithless species, my dog understood, in the way the best of them understand things we have no words for, exactly what those men walking toward that door would mean. And he went for them, not the playful bounding of the morning. He went low and silent, and then not silent, a sound coming out of him I'd never heard, and he put himself between the soldiers and the hill the same way Dasha had put herself between me and the child, the same way I was trying to put myself between the captain and the truth, the whole chain of us, man and woman and dog, each one standing in the door for the next. A private's carbine came up. I shouted, I think I shouted, I was already running. The shot was very loud in the valley, and then very quiet after. I won't dress it up. Hap died in the snow at the foot of the hill he'd led me to, and he died doing the one thing he'd been trying to make me understand since the edge of the timber 2 days before, which was that you stand in the door for the hurt thing behind you even when standing there costs you everything, especially then, that this is not foolishness, that this is the entire and only point of having a heart at all, and that I, who'd spent 11 years calling that lesson my brother's weakness, had needed a dog to teach it to me, and had learned it too late to save the dog. I got to him. I went down in the red snow and gathered him up, and he was already gone, his eyes already going to the flat that I knew too well, and I made a sound I have never made before or since, and the captain on his tall gray horse looked down at me holding my dead dog, and something moved across his clean face, not pity exactly. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that whatever he'd come up this mountain to find, he just watched a man's whole world end over it, and that there are things you can do to a country's enemies that you cannot do to a weeping man holding his dog without becoming something you can't ride back down the mountain from. The sergeant got down off his horse. Slow. He came and he crouched by me in the snow, this hard old man with the fist of a face, and he looked at Hap a long moment, and then he looked at the door of the hill close now, close enough to see the snow lay wrong against it, and then he looked back at his captain, and he made a choice of his own. The bravest one in the valley that day, maybe, because it was the one that could cost him his stripes and his pension and the only life he had. "Sir, there's nothing here," the sergeant said, loud and flat. "Marmot den, same as he told us this morning. Dog flushed it." He stood, putting his own body, his own bulk, between his captain's coin-eyes and that wrong-lying snow, the last link in the chain, a man I'd lied to twice standing in the door for strangers he'd ridden 2 days to capture, because he'd watched a dog die for them and could not, in the end, make himself worth less than the dog. "We're 3 hours from camp and there's weather coming. I won't lose men digging out a varmint hole, sir." The captain looked at the sergeant, at me, at the hill, And the weather, which had been my enemy the whole of this story, freezing the springs and burying the trails and nearly killing the people I'd sworn to save. The weather chose that moment to become, for once, a mercy. The next blow came over the western peaks all at once, the way they do up high, a wall of gray that swallowed the sun and threw the first hard pellets of snow into our faces, and the captain's tall gray horse shied, and the captain, who needed to be right but needed more to not freeze to death on a nameless mountain for it, gathered his reins. "Move out," he said to the sergeant. Not to me. He never looked at me again. He turned the gray downhill into the rising storm, and his squad turned after him, 8, 9 men strung out and vanishing into the white, and the frost-mustached private looked back once at the dead dog, at the man holding it, and touched 2 fingers to his hat brim. A small thing, a boy's apology for a thing he'd been ordered to be part of, and then he was gone too. The sergeant was the last. He stood over me a moment in the falling snow. "I had a dog," he said. "That was all." Then he mounted and rode down after the others, and left me alone in the valley with my friend going cold in my arms and a hill at my back full of the living he died to keep that way. She let me grieve before she came out. That was Dasha. She understood the size of it, and she gave me the only thing she had to give, which was time and the dignity of being alone in it. When the soldier's sound had gone fully into the storm and stayed gone, the door opened, and she came to me through the snow, and she knelt down across from Hap the way she'd knelt across from the old woman's ruined leg, and she put her hand flat on the dog's still side, and she said something low in her own tongue that I did not need translated, because grief is the one language every people speaks the same. The old woman lived. I should tell you that because I've made you carry the worst and you've earned the rest. Dasha had done her unbearable half clean and fast and without stopping, just as I'd shown her, and the laudanum had held, and the leg had come off above the rot, and the fire had been hot and the knife had been sharp, and the old woman was tougher than any creature I have known before or since. She lived through that night and the next, and through the great blow that buried the valley for 9 days. The 9 days I spent in that warm round hill with 4 strangers and the body of my friend, because the ground was frozen too hard to bury him and the storm too fierce to leave. We were 6 then in the hill, 5 living and 1 dog. And in those 9 days, snowed in together with no common tongue and nothing to do but survive, we became, I don't have a word for what we became. Not friends, that's too small and too easy. We became the ones who were in the hill. The boy's black toes I tended with the last of my cloth, and he lost 2 of them but kept the foot, and he showed me with his hands how his people set a snare, better than I'd ever learned it, and I showed him mine, and we caught enough up the smoke hole's draft and out the cracked door to keep the soup going. The child slept against my chest more than one of those nights, the same chest the old woman had pushed her hand against, the same chest the dog had bought back. And a man who'd sworn he never wanted children learned what it is to lie awake afraid to move for hours because a small warm sleeping thing has decided you are safe. Dahsha and I sat up the long nights by the fire and we built a tongue between us out of nothing. Her words and mine, traded slow across the embers, a dictionary written on the air and gone by morning. I learned her sister's name, the child's mother, dead on the October trail. She learned my brother's. We were 2 people who'd each lost the one who never could leave a hurt thing be, and had each spent the time since trying to become hard enough that it couldn't happen again, and had each failed, thank God, had each been dragged back to the soft, dangerous business of caring by a sick child and a stubborn dog and a hill that kept the living warm. On the 9th day the storm broke. The world came back blue and blinding and clean. And it was time, all of us knew it, to decide what came next. I buried Hap that morning in the one patch of ground inside the hill, near the spring, where the earth never froze. The boy helped me dig. The old woman, propped by the fire, sang something over it that I didn't understand and didn't need to. I have buried 2 horses, 1 brother, and now 2 dogs across my life, and I will tell you the truth I've never told anyone. I cried harder over that hound in that hill than over any man, and I am not ashamed of it, because he was the best of us, and he was the one who'd known all along the thing it took the rest of us a war and a winter to learn. Then I took them out. I knew the country and they didn't, not this part of it, and I knew where the army was and wasn't, and I knew a pass to the south the cavalry never bothered with because it went nowhere a white man wanted to go, which is to say it went exactly where these four needed to. I had the mule and what food the hill had left us, and a knowledge of those mountains 11 winters deep, and for once in my long, quiet, useless life, I had a reason to use all of it. It took us 11 days. There's a whole story in those 11 days that I may tell you sometime. The river crossing where we nearly lost the child, the night the wolves came and the old woman, one leg gone, sang them off, the morning we found a cavalry camp not yet cold and had to go back and around and lost 2 days to it. But this part of the story ends at the pass. At the top of the South Pass the country opened up, and away below and beyond was the long broken land that led down toward where what was left of Dahshaquotes people had scattered and were trying, the way water finds the low ground, to come quietly back together. Down there she had a chance. Up here she had none. And the line between the two was a ridge I could take her to, but could not cross with her, because a white man riding into what remained of that band would bring the very thing I'd spent a winter keeping off her. We stood at the top of the pass, the two of us, while the boy held the mule and the old woman rode and the child slept. She did not say thank you. I'm glad of it. Thank you would have been too small, the way friends was too small, and she knew it. Instead she took my hand, the hand I'd held open in the snow, the hand that had given her the knife, and she pressed something into it and closed my fingers over it the way I'd closed hers over the haft, and I looked down and it was a small thing, a carved thing, bone or antler, worn smooth, the kind of thing a person carries their whole life and gives away exactly once. Then she said my brother's name, Caleb. She'd kept it. And she touched her chest, and the child's sleeping head, and the place to the south where her people were. And I understood that she was telling me the child would carry it, that somewhere down in that broken country, in the years to come, there would be a child growing up with a white man's name folded in among the Apache ones, the name of a man who never could leave a hurt thing be, carried by people his own people had tried to erase, kept alive on purpose forever. As far from where it started as a name can travel and still be a name. That child is alive today. I have it on good word. Grown now with children of their own down in that southern country, carrying my dead brother's name into a century my brother never saw and I won't see the most of. I have never gone to find them. Some things you keep by not reaching for them. I learned that from a hill. I rode back north alone, the way I'd lived before, except I was not the same man and the country was not the same country and the empty quiet I'd loved was just empty now, with no good word for it anymore. I still trap. I still talk to keep my legs moving, though there's no dog at my heel to talk to, and I've not got another, and I don't expect I will. Some doors a man only gets dragged through once. But I keep the carved thing on a cord at my neck, and on the cold nights when the wind comes down off the high country, I take it out and hold it, and I think about a round hill that shouldn't exist, full of warm air and moving water and people the world wanted dead, and I think about a dog who knew before I did, and I am, for the first time in my long life, and at a price I'd pay again.